In February 2026, a team of Chinese researchers published a paper in Nature describing a communication system that solved a problem engineers had been stuck on for years: how to make optical fiber and wireless signals actually talk to each other on the same network, at speeds more than 10 times faster than anything 5G supports today. Within weeks, that legitimate, peer-reviewed result had spawned dozens of videos and articles claiming China had already switched on a live 6G network in multiple cities, with consumer phones arriving any day now. Almost none of that second part is true, and figuring out exactly where the real breakthrough ends and the hype begins turns out to be a far more interesting story than either version on its own. This matters because 6G headlines have become their own strange little genre online, recycled speed records repackaged every few months, each one presented as though the future had just arrived overnight. Scroll through the results for China's 6G breakthrough right now, and you will find video after video, article after article, all making nearly identical claims using nearly identical numbers, several of them recycling a wireless speed record that is actually 4 years old, dressed up as brand new. Cutting through that noise to find out what China's researchers actually published and what they did not is exactly what this video is going to do. The real result came from a team spanning Peking University, the Pengcheng Laboratory, Shanghai Tech University, and the National Optoelectronics Innovation Center, led by Peking University professor Wang Xingjun. It is a genuine, independently reviewed scientific achievement, not a press release dressed up as one, and it addresses a problem that has quietly been one of the biggest obstacles standing between today's 5G networks and whatever comes after them. By the end of this video, you will understand exactly what this team actually built, why the specific problem they solved matters more than the raw speed numbers making headlines, and why nearly every claim about 6G already being live is running years ahead of what any credible telecom body on Earth, including China's own, is actually promising. If you like videos about the technology quietly reshaping how the world works, hit like and subscribe so you do not miss what is coming. Let's start with the problem this specific breakthrough was actually built to solve. Every wireless network you have ever used is secretly two separate networks stitched together. Your phone talks to a nearby cell tower over the air, using radio waves, and that cell tower then hands your data off to a completely different kind of infrastructure: optical fiber, glass cables carrying data as pulses of light, which is what actually carries the overwhelming majority of the world's internet traffic across cities, countries, and oceans. Wireless and fiber have always used fundamentally different signal architectures and hardware to move the same data, which means every time information crosses from one system to the other, it has to be converted, decoded, and re-encoded, a process that adds cost, adds equipment, and adds a hard ceiling on how much speed and capacity can actually survive the handoff. For 5G, that conversion bottleneck was manageable, tucked away inside base stations most people never think about. For 6G, which is being designed around speeds high enough to support things like real-time holographic communication, AI data centers talking to each other across a city, and genuinely immersive augmented reality, that same bottleneck becomes a serious structural problem, one that raw wireless speed records alone cannot fix, no matter how impressive the peak number looks in a headline. That is precisely the piece Wang's team targeted, and it is worth being specific about what they actually built rather than treating it as another vague speed claim. Their system achieves single-channel data transmission of 512 gigabits per second over optical fiber and 400 gigabits per second over a wireless connection, using an architecture specifically engineered so both sides can talk to each other natively, without the expensive, capacity-limiting conversion step that has bottlenecked every previous attempt to merge the two. According to Wang, the design supports dual-mode transmission through both fiber and wireless simultaneously, which does more than avoid bandwidth limits and noise buildup. It also gives the resulting network meaningfully better resistance to interference than either technology achieves running on its own. To actually stress test the idea at something closer to real-world scale, the team simulated a large 6G user access scenario, running 86 separate channels of real-time 8K video simultaneously across the system, and measured a total transmission bandwidth more than 10 times higher than what current 5G standards support. That is not a single cherry-picked speed record measured under laboratory-only conditions built to look impressive in a press release. It is a demonstration of the entire architecture holding up under a load that actually resembles what a live city-scale network would eventually need to handle. Dozens of simultaneous high-bandwidth video streams rather than one idealized signal traveling a few meters in a shielded lab. Here is why that distinction matters more than it might sound like it does. Engineers working on 6G have talked for years about an all-optical architecture, networks where the wireless portion of the system integrates so seamlessly with existing fiber infrastructure that operators would not need to build an entirely separate, redundant layer of specialized conversion equipment just to connect cell towers to the backbone internet. Wang's team says their system is specifically designed for exactly that kind of seamless integration, and that it also performs well on energy consumption, cost, and scalability. Three unglamorous but absolutely decisive factors in whether a technology actually gets built at nationwide scale or stays a permanent laboratory curiosity. A wireless speed record that only works with custom, impossibly expensive lab equipment is a neat magazine headline. An architecture that a telecom operator could plausibly deploy across an entire city without reinventing every piece of existing fiber infrastructure underneath it is the difference between a science demo and the actual foundation of a future network. It is also worth being clear about what 6G is actually supposed to deliver beyond a bigger speed number, because the entire 100 times faster than 5G framing that dominates most coverage of this topic undersells what engineers are actually trying to build. Alongside raw throughput, the working technical targets for 6G include end-to-end latency below 0.1 milliseconds, roughly 10 times tighter than 5G's already fast 1 millisecond response time. Spectral efficiency high enough to pack far more data into the same slice of radio spectrum, and native integration of artificial intelligence directly into how the network manages itself, deciding in real time how to route traffic, balance load, and predict congestion before it happens, rather than reacting after the fact. Some 6G research proposals even describe integrated sensing and communication, using the same radio signals a network already sends to also detect the physical location and movement of objects and people nearby, blurring the line between a communications network and a radar system. None of that shows up in a single flashy gigabits per second number, but it is arguably the more important half of what 6G is actually being built to do, and it is exactly the kind of unglamorous systems integration work that Wang's team's fiber wireless result contributes to far more directly than any pure speed record would. This result also did not appear out of nowhere. China has been running a sustained, well-funded 6G research program for years, not chasing a single headline moment. Back in 2022, a separate government-backed institute, Purple Mountain Laboratories in Nanjing, working with China Mobile and Fudan University, set what was then described as a world record for real-time terahertz wireless transmission, hitting 206.25 gigabits per second using a custom-built 360 to 430 gigahertz system, itself framed at the time as roughly 10 to 20 times faster than 5G. That earlier terahertz work and this new fiber wireless integration result are solving genuinely different pieces of the same much larger 6G puzzle, one chasing raw wireless speed at extremely high frequencies, the other solving how that speed actually gets threaded into a usable, affordable, citywide network, and both fit inside a research pipeline China has been deliberately building for the better part of a decade. China has backed that pipeline with more than $1.4 billion in dedicated 6G funding through 2025 alone, channeled through the National Natural Science Foundation's coordinated 6G programs and distributed across more than 40 universities and research institutes nationwide, alongside additional funding flowing through provincial governments and state-owned telecom enterprises. The country's own IMT 2030 Promotion Group, the body formally coordinating national 6G strategy, has signed cooperation agreements with its European counterpart, the 6G Smart Networks and Services Industry Association, explicitly to keep China's technical work aligned with the same international standardization process everyone else is working through, rather than trying to build an incompatible, go-it-alone version of 6G. The payoff from all of that sustained investment is starting to show up in a number that matters just as much as any single speed record: patents. By one widely cited count reported by Nikkei, China now holds roughly 40.3% of all global 6G-related patent filings, ahead of the United States at 35.2%, with Japan trailing at 9.9%, and Europe close behind at 8.9%, and South Korea, the country widely credited with leading the world on 5G rollout speed, sitting further back still at just 4.2%. Huawei alone is reportedly the single largest individual patent filer in the entire 6G race, ahead of any company from any other country, with China's State Grid Corporation and China Aerospace Science and Technology Corporation, both state-run enterprises, also ranking among the top filers globally, a detail that says something about how broadly China has spread its 6G research bets beyond just its telecom companies. Patents alone do not guarantee a country wins a technology race, since plenty of heavily patented ideas never make it into a final global standard, but a nearly 5-point lead over the next closest country, sustained across thousands of individual filings rather than one lucky breakthrough, is a genuinely different kind of signal than a single viral headline. It would be genuinely dishonest, though, to let this video sit next to the wave of other videos and articles currently claiming China has already deployed a live 6G network, with consumer-ready phones just months away, because that claim does not survive contact with what every major telecom standards body on Earth, China's own included, is actually saying. Global 6G standardization runs through two coordinated processes: the International Telecommunication Union, which formally designates 6G under the label IMT 2030, and 3GPP, the international body that writes the actual technical specifications every phone and base station manufacturer builds against. As of 2026, the ITU's roadmap has technology proposals for IMT 2030 arriving between 2027 and early 2029, with a final designation targeted for 2030. 3GPP's own timeline points toward its first full 6G specification landing in Release 21, expected around 2028, with genuinely interoperable commercial 6G networks not arriving until roughly 2030 at the earliest, across every country currently working on the technology, not just China. China's own IMT 2030 promotion group, the national body actually coordinating the country's 6G strategy, has publicly targeted 2030 for commercial 6G launch as well, the exact same year every other major telecom bloc on the planet is aiming for. There is no credible technical body anywhere claiming a fully live, standards-compliant 6G network exists today, in China or anywhere else, and no major phone maker has announced 6G-capable consumer hardware for the simple reason that the underlying standard those chips would need to be built against does not exist yet. The gap between "we just set an impressive lab speed record" and "you can now buy a 6G phone" is also not a new pattern specific to this announcement. It is essentially the same gap that opened up after Purple Mountain Laboratories' 2022 terahertz record, which also generated a wave of headlines implying 6G was imminent, 4 years before this newer breakthrough, and commercial 6G still was not close then either. Look closely at some of the videos and articles currently circulating about China's 6G breakthrough, and you will actually find that exact 2022 number, 206.25 gigabits per second, being recycled and represented as though it were a brand new 2026 result, sitting right alongside genuine coverage of Wang's actual new paper, with most readers having no easy way to tell the two apart. This has genuinely happened before with other emerging Chinese technology stories too. A real, sourced, peer-reviewed result gets published, and within days, a second wave of low-effort content repackages it with bigger claims, recycled older statistics, and speculative timelines nobody involved in the actual research ever stated, because that version generates more clicks than the more careful, accurate one. Wireless speed records, measured under controlled lab conditions with custom equipment nobody could actually manufacture and sell at consumer scale yet, are a recurring genre of telecom announcement, genuinely useful signals of research progress, but reliably years ahead of anything resembling a network you could actually connect a phone to. Terahertz frequencies specifically, the band most of these headline speed records rely on, also come with a physical limitation that gets glossed over in almost every viral version of this story. Signals at those frequencies travel only very short distances, often just tens of meters, and are easily blocked by walls, rain, and even dense foliage, meaning a terahertz-based 6G network would likely require vastly more base stations packed far more densely than a 5G network does today. An infrastructure and cost problem that a single Nature paper does not solve, no matter how impressive its bandwidth numbers are. Building out that kind of density across an entire country is a decade-scale civil engineering and telecom infrastructure project in its own right, layered on top of whatever technical standard eventually gets agreed on internationally. None of that makes the actual February 2026 result meaningless, and it would be just as dishonest to swing all the way to dismissing it as empty hype. Solving the fiber wireless integration bottleneck at real demonstrated throughput under conditions that simulate genuine network load rather than a single idealized test is exactly the kind of unglamorous, structural engineering problem that has to get solved before 6G can exist at all, regardless of which specific frequency bands or radio technologies eventually get chosen for the final global standard. Peer-reviewed publication in Nature means the claims have already survived independent scientific scrutiny before a single headline was written about them, a meaningfully higher bar than a company press release or a government lab's own promotional statement. This is real, measurable progress toward a network that genuinely will need integration exactly like this to work at scale. It is simply progress measured in years of foundational research, not in weeks until launch. Zoom out, and the more accurate way to describe what is actually happening is a genuine, multi-front global race that nobody has already won, China included, despite what its current lead in patent filings and research funding might suggest. South Korea, Japan, the European Union, and the United States are all running their own well-funded 6G research programs in parallel, all targeting roughly the same 2030 commercialization window through the same ITU and 3GPP standardization process China is participating in, not competing against. American telecom equipment makers and chip makers are contributing their own proposals to the same 3GPP working groups China's researchers publish alongside. European operators are running their own terahertz and integrated network trials through programs like the EU's 6GIA, and Japan and South Korea, the country that led the world on 5G rollout speed just a few years ago, are both funding their own national 6G research pushes rather than conceding the field. Nobody outside China is treating this race as already decided, and the standardization process itself is explicitly structured so that no single country's technology gets adopted globally without going through the same shared international review every other proposal has to survive. China's genuine advantages right now, its patent filing lead, its sustained multi-billion-dollar research funding, and its track record of solving hard structural problems like this fiber wireless integration are real and worth taking seriously, not dismissed the way some of the surrounding hype deserves to be. They are also advantages measured in research momentum heading toward a 2030 finish line everyone agreed on together, not a race China has already crossed alone while the rest of the world stood still. A 5-year-old wireless speed record still getting recycled as breaking news, sitting right next to a genuine, peer-reviewed 2026 result, tells you something important about how this entire topic gets covered online. The real story rarely needs the exaggeration. It is interesting enough on its own. If this video helped you separate the real breakthrough from the headlines exaggerating it, hit like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you catch the next one. And here's a question for the comments. Now that you know the actual global 6G timeline runs through 2030 for everyone, not just China, does a 4-year head start on research like this feel like a genuine lead worth watching closely, or is it too early in a race this long to call?